ways I can go from here. If anybody has a specific question, feel free to ask it. If not, somebody did ask me ahead of time to talk about why I chose this path, but it's kind of a loaded question and it needs to kind of be taken back further. So I'm going to start with what made me leave Jehovah's Witnesses, even though it's a topic that I really don't like because it has been difficult, very difficult. It's basically trickled throughout my life. So even picking like a specific spot to talk about is very difficult because even from an early onset age growing up in the society, I was different, so I was kind of outcast in a way and distanced myself. And yeah, and there's a lot of witnesses that have come out lately, and even just watching the videos when I was coming out was a big help to know that I wasn't alone, because it's rough. It's rough to take what you believed growing up and completely tear it apart, pick it apart, and when you're told not to do that, it just makes it that much harder, because you first have to break down that barrier of allowing yourself to even pick apart what you believe and question, why do I believe this? And for me, it's kind of twofold, because there was a lot of things that didn't make sense to me and I didn't really believe, but I just chalked it up to human error, my own naivety, just being young and not, understanding. But now, being able to look back, I can understand that that wasn't the case. So what really woke me up was actually a video that Tatiana sent me July of last year. It was a video about Armageddon, and I have never cried so hard in my life watching a video, because as a witness, Armageddon is literally the equivalent of hell. Entire destruction of the planet, and it's very dark and gruesome, and you're basically living your life in fear that Armageddon could happen at any moment. So to watch that video and have the person explain from the scriptures how that ideology, that belief was false and unfounded on basically the Bible, was mind-boggling to me. Like, it blew me away. Like, there's no words for it. Like, it's like an arrow to the heart. Like, one of the most fundamental things that you were believing, that made you believe everything else, was a fallacy. So that in itself was really hard. From there, it took me a little while to kind of give myself permission to continue to look at other things. Trying to think of, because I know I sent it to my dad, I think, because I wanted to get his opinion, but he refused to even look at it. Hey, Katie. Yeah, so he basically shut me down. He wouldn't even look at it. He's like, that's apostate material, I don't want anything to do with it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm trying to ask a question, and they basically, they're like, go do your own research, go on the website, go on the CD-ROM, you have all the publications, just go look at the publications. Don't allow yourself to be pulled away from a video. And at that time, me and Tatiana were actually running a Facebook group for other Jehovah's Witnesses who were against vaccines. And, whew, man, she started posting some stuff in there, and people lost their mind. Like, it was crazy. Like, I started getting messages and people were like, why is she posting this? What is she posting? And it wasn't even anything like that crazy. Like, she wasn't posting about belief. She was posting about some of their shareholdings, I believe, and they had some shares in some weaponry company or something, and people lost their mind over that, and they're like, oh, it's you know, it's probably not true, it's really none of our business where they put their money. The money that you donate is their money, but okay. So she just kept posting in our group that we were running. Yeah, that too. But there was multiple things that you were posting anyway. And people started getting upset because I was admin in the group and I didn't immediately remove those posts or block her. And I was telling people, well, you know what, I value what she has to say on any topic. You know, I'm not so close-minded as I'm not gonna, you know, at least take a look at something that she's sharing, because I do value what she shares about other topics. So people lost their mind that I wasn't immediately removing her from the group. So the other groups that we were a part of that were, you know, about homeschooling and parenting and whatever, we got booted out of and were blacklisted as apostate, even though at that point I hadn't forsook my faith. I had just sided with a friend in not removing a post. So from there, we were blacklisted from all the JW groups. I basically had to shut down my page or turn it over to another admin. I forget what happened. I think I just deleted it because there was so much drama. I got blacklisted and that hurt. Like, I didn't know how to react. Like, I didn't know these people, but to be called an apostate at that point for I didn't even do anything. It was hurtful. But I kind of took it as a sign that maybe I need to kind of look into things more myself, because I've always been open-minded. Any of my friends that grew up with me will tell you that anytime, you know, religion or whatever else came up, I would be hesitant to talk about my own beliefs, and I would usually try and get them to prompt about a specific question and say, oh, well, they believe this. And very infrequently would I say, I believe this. It was always, they believe this, or this is what they believe. And I only really thought about that today because even from a young age, I was distancing myself. And until I really started to reflect back on my life, and well, I don't remember a lot about my childhood, but at least from pre-teen age, around 7th grade, I can definitely tell that I was starting to distance myself. So if you want to track back a little bit to when I was in school, I took world religions, 10th grade I think it was, which is surprising that I was allowed to do that. The reason I was allowed to take world religions was because I told my parents that it would help me in the ministry to be more understanding and know how to help people come to the truth. So that's kind of how I twisted it to take world religions. And that's actually a survival technique, which again, reflecting back, I can tell that I did a lot, was I knew how to play the game. I knew what words to use. I knew how to manipulate. It's a bad way to think about it, but I knew how to manipulate the situations to get what I wanted. So grade 10, I took world religions. I loved it. I got 100% in that class, final grade. My teacher loved me. it was an amazing class. When we were talking about Christianity in, you know, the module and the textbooks, it was a lot about, you know, Orthodox Christianity, Anglican versus Catholic kind of beliefs, but it was very vague. You know, just kind of Jesus, you know, dying, and I can't even remember. Like, it was just very basic, and like, I didn't feel like I gained very much insight into Christianity based on that class. Definitely on other religions, I learned a lot, like Hinduism and Buddhism, etc. Like, they were very interesting. I loved learning about them. But Christianity, there wasn't a whole lot there. I think it's just because I'm not sure why. Anyway, but there wasn't a lot about Christianity. And a couple people had brought up something about how Jehovah's Witnesses, kingdom halls, or churches don't have windows. So this girl, she stands up and she's like, you know, sitting in her seat. You know how teenagers are, they're like sitting on their feet and they're like propped up. She's like going on about about how they didn't have windows because they don't want the devil to get in. And it took everything I had to keep from laughing, and I'm just like, oh my God. Is this what people really think of us? Like, we don't have windows because we don't want the devil to get into our church? Oh my God, but I haven't forgotten. I don't know who it was, but I've never forgotten, because it was just so hysterical, and I'm just like, I gotta clear this up, because it's just, I can't let people think that, like, they believe in some pretty crazy things, but to believe that the devil can't get in through a wall or a window is just something else. So I put my hand up and I told the teacher, I'm like, I gotta clear this up. I'm like, the window thing has nothing to do with spirits or anything like that. It's literally just a physical material thing. It's security. They don't have windows so that people can't break in. My specific congregation, Kingdom Hall, only had 3 very small window panes like this wide, 3 of them, about maybe 6 feet tall, and they had a wooden rail that my dad had actually put in, and that was it. So, and I can't even remember any Kingdom Halls that I were ever in that actually had windows, except for the one that when I was really little, a really old one, and it had windows across the like billions, I think they're called, like on the entire wall. So that was like the only one that I knew had windows, but I knew it had nothing to do with what they were claiming it was. So that was my experience with world religions. So that was grade 10. From there, nothing much really happened. I had a lot of trouble around that time. I had actually, my boyfriend at the time, who I was pretty serious with, that's a story for another time, we had gotten in trouble because we were doing something that was not appropriate because we weren't married. And only one friend knew because I had told her because I had some concerns about something that had happened. And somehow, I guess, they were doing their family study, which is once a week, you know, the family sits down, kind of like a family meeting, but they'll study a publication or whatever. And whatever they were studying made her conscience feel so guilty about what I had done that she told her dad. And her mom? Either way, no, one of her parents. So her grandparent is actually one of the church elders in one of the other congregations that shared the same church. So my friend told also one of my other best friends. Anyway, very confusing, very complex, and ridiculous. Anyway, long story short, I got in a lot of trouble. I was pulled into what's called the Judicial Committee, which is 3 older men. They were all at least over 50, if not, well, 50 up to 80 or more. So either way, it doesn't matter. So 3 older men, and I had to go into detail about what happened with me and my boyfriend, what I was wearing, why it happened, what exactly happened, and the entire situation that allowed for that to happen. It was extremely uncomfortable. My father was also in the room for the first session, and he was twisting my words. And I knew that the way he was going, that if I didn't step in and stop, I would be completely excommunicated from the church at 15 years old. 15 or 16. So I asked for him to be removed from the room. I said, if I have to go through this, I don't want my dad in the room. So they were reluctant, but because I was baptized, they said, you know, fine, she's obviously at an age of maturity, she got baptized, so she's in charge of her own faults, I guess. So father was removed, and I went through this process with these 3 older men, confessing my sin, explaining everything that happened in as much detail as I would allow myself. And from that point, I was removed as a publisher, which means I wasn't allowed to engage in the ministry, or I was allowed to go out, but I wasn't allowed to talk. It was really weird, and I wasn't allowed to comment. I wasn't allowed to be on the theocratic ministry school, a lot of things. They also publicly spoke out against me on front of the platform, so the entire congregation was basically told what I had done, and they had a special talk about why it was wrong. So I was very singled out. It was very uncomfortable. 15 years old in front of at least 100 people that, you know, I kind of barely knew, exposing my sin to them. So that was one of the things that really put me off from then on, was the way that they lovingly disciplined me based on my sin. My boyfriend had nothing done to him. He got a slap on the wrist, and that was it. He didn't have any of his privileges removed. Nothing else happened to him. No public announcement, nothing. So as a female, I was publicly shamed. And as a male, I guess boys will be boys or whatever, right? So that happened. So from there, things were kind of rough towards the end of my 12th grade, my senior year. My parents were having some troubles. I'm not going to go into detail about their issues. I'll just say that my father is an extreme narcissist, and he is psychologically abusive and has a lot of his own issues that need to be worked through. They have come quite a ways, but during that time, it was really rough. Nobody believed me. I actually ran away multiple times to my boyfriend, which is why a lot of what happened. I basically left in the middle of the night. I had a friend pick me up, drive 8 hours to pick me up, and I left in the middle of the night. And I didn't talk to them for an entire summer. They called the cops on me, but I was 16, so I knew my rights. I knew that I was allowed to leave and that they didn't have a right to take me back unless I was willing to go back. So I knew the law was on my side. So my boyfriend's family had set me up with one of his schoolmates to live with them so that I could continue going to school and still, you know, be around them because they were witnesses and, you know, maintain that support, go to the meetings and whatnot. So they had the cops come and show up at her place. I didn't know they were coming. And, you know, they were asking me what was going on. I kind of very vaguely told them, and they're like, okay, we're not going to make you go back. They just have some things for you. We're going to send them back home. So they dropped off the stuff for my parents, and my parents were sent back home. My parents were not happy with that. They went to the elders of their congregation. So what they did was they said, because I was still on probation, basically, that unless I came back to my parents' house and to the congregation to serve out my time, which is whatever they deem appropriate, that I would be completely disfellowshipped, excommunicated. Like, nobody can talk to me, nothing. So that would mean that my boyfriend and his family would not be able to continue to help me. So I was left stranded. I had no options. I had to go back home. And if any of my friends remember, they'll remember me starting grade 11 or 12. I wasn't there for the first couple weeks, and all of a sudden I show up and I'm like, you know, I'm not going to be here long. I'm just, you know, serving out my time with, you know, stuff that's going on at home. And I was fully expecting to go back. Didn't happen, and I had to stay at home with the ongoing psychological, emotional, etc. abuse going on. So it all kind of came to a head when my brother put himself into, hold on, I'm gonna fix it. My brother put himself into foster care. And, whew, man, that was a whole nother story in itself. I don't even know how he did it, to be honest, because at that point we were living separate lives. And in all honesty, I do play a role in what happened to him because I did kind of narc on him. Because of what I was going through, I felt it was unjust that he was allowed to get with what he was getting away with just because he was a boy. So he would be, you know, skipping class, hanging out with kids at the skate park. He was smoking weed. I had very strong views at that time against. And I basically definitely played a role in the downfall of his life from there. Because my parents immediately pulled him out of school and they were trying to do correspondence with him. But he wasn't having it. He would just leave during the day and he'd come back to eat and sleep and he'd be gone again. And my parents were, you know, at their wits' end. And somehow, some way, my brother put himself into foster care. I had to go to court and testify about why my brother was in foster care. My parents basically wanted me to lie to the lawyers and judges, saying that everything was fine and that it's just my brother being a rebellious child. But I knew what I went through and I knew what he was going through, and I'm like, no, it's not a healthy environment for anybody. And my brother wasn't put back with my parents. They put him into full-time foster, and that was that. They were allowed visitations, surprisingly, and my brother continued to have issues from there on. And even to this day, he's still struggling with the fallout because he didn't get to finish high school. All because he wanted to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. He didn't want a part of it because he saw the hypocrisy. And he's 2 years younger than me, so I mean, he was like 13, 14, and even younger, and he was seeing, you know, all this hypocrisy. And I mean, I was seeing it too. I was seeing how people were getting treated differently based on their status in the congregation. You know, I just figured it, you know, it's just how things are. But he wasn't having it, so he removed himself, and because of it, his life's been difficult because he wanted out, and that was the only way he could do it. So he has to live with the lack of support, education, etc., just so that he wasn't in this indoctrination. And I have so much respect for him because he was able to basically give up his life in order to gain his life. And if he watches this, I love you so much, and I'm proud of you, and I know your life is so hard, and I wish I could take back what I did, and I wish I could help you more, but you know, what's done is done. So, grade 12, I was the only one living at home by then, so I was getting the brunt of it. My mom was, for the most part, throwing herself into, you know, her own business and her own work. But things were not pleasant. So we actually had gotten my mom out of my father's house. At the time I had a car, but my dad had actually pulled the insurance and everything so that he could control us. Because he would do that. He would give us something and then take it away. But that car I had earned. I had worked all summer, and it was mine in every sense of the way. Like, that car was legally mine, but he was paying the insurance, and I was only driving it to school because I had actually lost my part-time job because of going to see my boyfriend and whatever, and they were not happy that I was a witness, and they were persecuting me. Anyway, so my father had pulled my car off the road, so my sister secretly put insurance on my car so that I could remove my mom from my father's home and myself. So I took my mom to my cousin's house, and the entire time I was lying to my father saying, oh, well, I'm going to take her to the mental hospital because he thought she was crazy. He still does. So I'm taking her to the mental hospital. She's going to be there. She's on hold. I can't tell you where, blah, 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 blah. So I took her to my cousin's house. I left her there, and I went to go live with my sister. So I was finishing grade 12, driving good 35, 40 minutes every day from my sister's house to school just to finish my senior year. Dealing with all of my parents' crap and my brother, who they asked me at the time in grade 12 if I would get a place and support my brother. I was 17 years old, and CPS asked me if I would support my brother, and I wanted to, but I couldn't. I was not in a position to support myself, let alone my kid brother. It wasn't possible. I mean, every day I wish I could have. I wish I could have stepped up and done it when I was in college. It wasn't possible. It wasn't a logical way for me to proceed with my life. And it wasn't even an available option for me because I had no income. It took me a long time to find a job where I could actually, that wasn't seasonal or temporary. So grade 12 finished, and my mom was staying at my cousin's, and my sister had her 10th anniversary, I believe. So we had gotten a cottage, and we brought my mom to stay with us for a couple nights so that she could be a part of it, because, you know, we were celebrating and she had paid for it and whatever, and, you know, kind of give her some respite from the entire situation. So she stayed with us a couple days, and then we dropped her back off at my sister's house. At this time, my father still didn't know where she was technically, but somehow he figured out, or I don't even know, and convinced her to go on a business trip with him. And from there, they basically got back together, even though we had busted our butts to get my mom out. From there, I wasn't really going to a whole lot of meetings. I would go with my sister, just kind of going through the motions, you know, just being friendly to people and whatever. I started working for a cleaning company who the owner, her brother is actually an elder in my sister's congregation. I didn't even know that this sister and his other sister existed. So I was blown away. And she was actually my introduction into Reiki, however you want to say it. So what happened was I was extremely sick. Like, I don't even know what I had. I was just completely drained from everything. And I was getting ready and trying to save to start college in January. So I was starting this job, and she's like, you know, you only need this job for a couple months, that's fine. And she's like, I just finished my Reiki, so you look really worn down. Why don't you, come on over to my house and, I'll give you a treatment. And I'm like, sure, whatever, I'm open. I've always been open. So we go up into her studio, and she's kind of explaining it to me, and I'm like, okay. She lays me down, and she asks if she can say her prayer, her incantation, whatever. So I was taught to always allow somebody else to pray for you, but also to pray for them in turn during the time that they are praying. So while she was doing her incantation for my Reiki treatment, I was basically praying at the same time, and I said, I accept the healing, but I remove myself from the spiritual aspect of it. So she went through her treatment. It was really awesome, and she gave me some, I guess, essential oils, something else. I can't remember what it was, to drink afterwards, and I felt great, and I know I worked for her for the next few months before I went off to college. When I went to college, my schedule was so busy that it was really hard to make the weekly meetings, because there's one during the week and one on the weekend. And I don't think I was working at the time, as I wasn't working during my first year of college. So I had a lot of late evening classes, so the class actually interfered with the church schedule, so I wasn't able to make the church schedule. So the elders would come around on the weekends or whatever and be like, oh, well, why aren't you at the meetings? You should make time for the meetings. And I'm like, I'm in school. And they're like, well, school isn't that important. You should just pioneer, which is going door to door as a career, no pay, basically living your life in servitude. A lot of them get like part-time jobs as cleaning and whatever just to pay their bills. But I'm like, well, I understand and respect that, people have chosen to do that, but I'm in school right now. I want to work with kids. It's only 2-year course. I mean, it's not going to take me that much time at all. And I had to go through that with them fairly often. And when I would actually make it to meetings, the older pioneers would attack me, basically, with the same thing. Why are you going to school? You don't need to go to school. And I would say, oh, well, you know, I really do want a career working with kids and whatever. And they go, oh, that's just a job. It's not a career. Your career is serving God. And I'm like, okay. So that, again, was something that put me really off, because I didn't want to live my life going door to door. Doing that for me was extremely uncomfortable. Every time I did go out in service, knocking on doors, I would try my very best to go alone. When we did like quick campaigns, I would try and go alone, because the way that other people approached talking to others about their beliefs, I found appalling, because they would just attack people for their beliefs. Oh, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And I'm like, you're not even hearing them out. How can you preach to somebody about what you believe if you're not listening to them at all? You're just saying, oh, that's wrong. So that always irked me, especially the way that my dad would be, because he would get so angry, like almost physically violent, shaking, angry, talking to people about their beliefs, because they were set in their beliefs and they didn't want to hear my father. Like, they would listen respectfully, but they weren't buying it, and that would piss my father off so much, and I just couldn't stand it. So going out in service as a full-time career was never ever a thought in my mind. And for them to downplay the amount of work that I was doing trying to actually get my ECE it hurt, because I was pouring everything I had into it. I was driving, 2-3 hours a day back and forth between classes and my practicum, etc. And it hurt that, I wasn't getting acknowledgement for my hard work. So that was that. And I basically just kept distancing myself throughout my 2 years of college. Then somewhere along the line, I'm like, I was tired of the harassment. So I'm like, fine, you know what? I'll be a good Jehovah's Witness. So I asked my boss, because I had actually found a job, good steady part-time job. I said I need to change my schedule to fit with my church meetings and whatever else. And she was very accommodating, and I was thankful for that. So I changed my schedule, and I made it to more meetings, but I was still getting harassed. Like, why aren't you doing more? You should do this, you should do that, you should join the school. Again, something that was very uncomfortable for me, because I had to get up and talk in front of people, and I don't like doing that. So I was constantly being harassed, so I just kept distancing myself. And then shortly after that, I actually met my husband. Hello, Char. So for the few people who know about our relationship, it was very quick. So we actually found each other on Instagram through a hashtag about Jehovah's Witnesses. So automatically that was a connection. I actually had this really long list about everything that I wanted in a mate. And, he was literally all of it. So I'm like, okay, well, obviously God has sent him to me, because there is no way, there's no logical reason that he would ever be able to find me. I mean, he lived in Georgia, I lived in Ontario, Canada, and he commented on a picture that I had posted about school. So in order for him to find me, the odds were innumerable. Like, he was sent from above. Checked off all my list. So March or April. So Memorial, which is the only thing that they celebrate, was at that time. So we were talking and texting constantly. We were sending pictures about our memorial outfits, because it's the only thing they celebrate. So that's like our Christmas, well, Easter. So after that, he had said something really sweet, and it made me realize for sure that, you know, he's the one. So we made plans for him to come visit, and that was a little hard and a little better going over with my family than expected. I immediately called my mom and I told her that I wanted to meet the next day. So we went for lunch and I told her all about him. And even my sister, in the morning, she's like, "You were talking all night. What's up?" And I'm like, she's like, "He's the one, isn't he?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So they were all happy, and even though, you know, it was a million miles away. So we made plans for him to come in June, just after my birthday. He stayed for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, we basically knew that, you know, we're meant for each other. So he had an international convention coming up in Atlanta. And what that is they have Jehovah's Witnesses from all around the world who, for his speak Spanish, they would come and they would have this big convention with all of these people from different countries, and they would talk about, you know, what's going on in their country with the ministry and whatever. So I convinced my family, even though I was pretty much independent at the time, to let me go and take me across the border to go to Buffalo to get on a plane to go to Georgia to go to this convention, because I was trying to be a good Jehovah's Witness at this time. So go to Georgia. Hey, Megan. And we go to the convention. We have a pretty good time. I didn't understand a word the entire weekend, but it didn't matter because spiritual blessings, and I was doing what I was supposed to, and God was smiling on me, gave me this beautiful man. So the 2 weeks that I was supposed to be here were coming to a close, and I was really upset and didn't want to leave at all. So he proposed, and you know, we were looking through, you know, all the legality about how to proceed, because it's very complicated when you have an immigration marriage. So there was a couple different ways that you can go about it. I could have gone back, and I had to wait for permission to come into the country to get married, etc. But then there was the option where if I stayed, we could file right away, but we had to get married right away and file immediately. So we opted to do that, and my family was not happy. Not happy at all. They're like, "Well, you know, why don't you just come back? The wedding is usually on the bride's turf, you know." But I stayed here, and I've been here ever since. So from there, we were fairly regular at the meetings. We got married, and we were fairly regular for the first while, but I got pregnant within a month of our getting married. And then a month after that, we were having our formal reception, and some of my family were trying to come down. Only my mom came to my wedding. The entire guest people that came to my reception were people that he knew that spoke Spanish, witnesses, and I have never seen anybody be so disrespectful. My entire reception of Jehovah's Witnesses was a disaster. I do not look upon that day with a lot of happiness at all. Very few moments. I literally went outside and screamed. It was a mess of a night. And that put me off even more, because these people were supposed to be, you know, my spiritual brother and sisters. You know, they're supposed to be the most loving, happy, respectful people on the planet. Yet at my wedding, where they were guests, they were being extremely disrespectful. So that put me off even more. So my pregnancy went on, and I had a fairly easy pregnancy, but I had a lot of really low energy, so it made it really hard to go to church meetings. And throughout my pregnancy, we would have calls from the elders, and they're like, oh, why aren't you at your meeting? You should still make an effort and whatever. Or why doesn't my husband just leave me at home alone and go to the meeting by himself? And thank God he didn't. So we just, did our thing. And during my pregnancy, there was an issue in Canada with a woman who gave birth, who was about my age, and I believe the baby died. I don't know the full details, but society got very invasive, but very secret about it. My father had contacted me, and he said the society wants all pregnant women to tell their hospital liaison committee, which is a group of elders that handle health-related hospital things, to let them know that you're pregnant, where you're going to be delivering, and all this. So my local elders didn't really know, because this was an issue that was going on in Canada, and I don't think they were too concerned about the United States at that point. But I told them anyway, so we went and we met with the elders, and we're like, we're pregnant, and we're going to have a midwife, but this is our backup doctor, and whatever. And they're like, oh, okay. But yeah, I thought it was very weird that they would want to know where I was delivering. It was obviously a blood issue, because they don't take blood transfusions. So obviously there was some kind of issue there where they wanted to make sure that pregnant mothers who were delivering and had trouble were not accepting any blood transfusion or blood related treatments during, I guess, post birth. So that was extremely weird to me. Hey Kayla, hey Amanda. So we had Caspian. I had to be induced because of other issues. My midwife refused to deliver. That was an extremely stressful story. Another one for another time. And so for the first few months of his life, we didn't go to meetings. It was very hard. And I actually wrote a blog about Caspian's role in my waking up from and leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. So I know I'm really going on about this, but it kind of boils down to Caspian, because his birth and him being so difficult during meetings was so hard on me, because I was wanting to, be a good Jehovah's Witness and do what I was supposed to be doing as a mother and a wife, and raise my son up. And toddlers aren't meant to sit still. They're not meant to sit for a 3-hour meeting, be quiet. I mean, they're not supposed to play with toys. They're not supposed to have coloring books or anything. They're not supposed to have food. So I mean, they're expecting toddlers to sit there, be quiet, and that's not age appropriate at all. And that irked me on another scale, because I went for ECE and I know how children are, and I worked with toddlers, and they're expecting my less than a year-old toddler to do what I couldn't even do, sit for 3 hours and pay attention. So it was just too difficult. So we decided, we're just not going to bother, because it's too stressful on us. Every time we went, it would be screaming and fighting and people staring and him climbing under chairs. And then my husband had a really bad bout of anxiety and stress, and he couldn't sit either. Like his mind was just racing, and he couldn't handle being in that environment. So we took a break, and we just kept to ourselves and didn't go to meetings. But the elders showed up at our house, and they're basically attacking me again and going on about how we should be going to the meetings and how we should make our child behave and all this stuff. And I'm like, you know what? This loving meeting that you're having here wasn't loving. I'm a new parent. I'm going through postpartum depression, and you're telling me that what I'm doing isn't good enough because I'm not at your religious meetings. I was done. at that point. Mentally, I was just like, you know what? I don't want anything to do with it right now. And my husband said, well, you know what? We'll just stay away from now, do stuff at home, and when he's older and can sit, we'll go back. But during that time, go back to when I was talking a little earlier, I had my little Facebook group and things blew up, and from there I just started digging. I dug into basically all other beliefs, and it was baffling to me that they like to call themselves Christians because they believe in Christ, but they do not believe in any of the tenets of Christianity, like Christ being part of the Godhead and the cross and a bunch of other stuff. So I had but because I had been out and kind of fading away for so long, I had to kind of relearn what I knew and then tear it apart. And that was hard, because you literally have to tear apart everything you thought you believed, and to know that it's not true in any way, shape, or form based on what they claim the Bible and what they believe isn't really in the Bible. It's only in their publications because they pick and choose pieces of scripture to fit their doctrine, and their Bible is a whole nother issue. And that was one thing growing up that really bothered me, was they changed their Bible. And when they changed their Bible, I held it and I'm like, no. I'm like, you don't change the Bible. How can you change the Bible? The Bible is the Bible. I mean, it's thousands of years old. What is there to change? And they're like, oh, well, we're making it more friendly to read so that it's easier for people who don't know how to read or who are learning English can read it. And I'm like, so you're dumbing down the Bible? Okay. And I said that to my mom, and she was so insulted. She's like, it's a gift from God, from Jehovah. You should be appreciative of this gift. And I wasn't. I'm like, you're not dumbing down my Bible. So I used my old Bible for the longest time until basically I had no choice but to use a new one, because all of their publications were starting to use the new scriptures. And unless you had the new Bible, nothing made sense, because they were making their Bible fit their doctrine. So I had to tear apart all my beliefs. And one of the things that made me finally basically lose my mind was the amount of pedophilia and sexual abuse to minors. This is not something that I normally talk about, and I really don't want to, but it is what made me leave. Because in Australia, they had a court case with over 1,000 incidents of unreported sexual abuse in the congregations, where it was only dealt with internally within the church and was not reported to the police. The court found them to basically be in violation of law by not reporting it, and they were told that they needed to change their policy. But then they publicly said that they weren't going to change their policy, and I haven't kept up with it, and I don't really know what happened, but you can look it up. It's called the Australian Royal Commission, and there was a whole bunch of testimonies, and they are some of the saddest, most horrific things you will ever hear or read in your entire life. Like, it was baffling. And as a parent, I couldn't put my son in a position where that might ever happen. If you knew your child was going to be, molested or abused, etc., you would never put them in that situation. So from there, I cannot have anything to do with this organization, no matter what they believe, whether or not I believe it. yeah, I know they didn't change anything, but they were told if they didn't, things would happen, so I don't know what was supposed to happen. But I couldn't let my son be raised in an organization where if anything did happen, there would be no legal reprimand, and the person who was the perpetrator would be able to walk free and continue to be able to be in the congregation, publicly preach in public to anyone, go door to door where there are children. I couldn't have any part of that. I morally could not have a part of that. And I wrote about that in my letter to my parents that I publicly posted. And I sent it to them the night before, and the day after I publicly posted it. And I went on about how this is basically as kindly as I can put it why I'm leaving. And it blew up. My parents lost their mind. My dad started talking to my husband behind my back, told him that I was crazy, that I was probably schizophrenic, that my mind wasn't absorbing minerals or vitamins or nutrients, so I'm losing my mind because I believe this, and that I'm leaving God's organization because of this. And they were trying to convince me that, oh, it's only a few incidents, that they actually do report it to the police. They don't. They have a whole book detailing how they deal with situations, and they do not report it to the police at all. They keep files, and they've been destroying those files. And me and my husband, we share everything. There is nothing that we hide from each other, especially from things that our parents try and tell to us about behind our back. So he was showing me these emails, and I was livid that my own father would talk about me in this way, basically saying, take control of your wife, basically be how my dad is, like, not physically, but in a mental and, I guess, spiritual sense, like, get me under control. And that's just not how me and my husband's relationship is. We are partners in everything, And seeing my parents' marriage, I knew that that's not what I wanted. And I would never tolerate it. Anyway, so we didn't respond to my father at all. My sister had also sent an email. I don't know if I ever read it, but it's basically all the same stuff. Basically, oh, just go back to the meetings, it'll be fine. You can't throw away all your belief system based on what a few people that are bad might be doing. But I wasn't having it. So I haven't talked to my sister since she sent that letter. She immediately blocked and deleted me from all of the social media. I haven't seen a picture of my niece in at least a year. I'm pretty sure she started high school yesterday because she's the same age as one of my cousin's daughters. So my niece, who I basically was involved in her life from birth to 10 until I moved, I haven't seen a picture of. She hasn't talked to me. The last time that they visited was actually the February before I found out all this stuff, and that was rough. It's rough not being able to talk to your family. But I cut off my dad. I don't have any qualms about my dad. Cutting him out was a really good thing because he's a very draining narcissist. My mom, I limit what she can see and what I share with her. There was a long period where she didn't talk to me, and the only reason she did start talking to me again, thank God, was because of something that my aunt, my dad's sister, had said to her. So she started talking to me, but we keep things we talk about health and family, and that's it. And that's honestly the way I like it, because if I allow her to talk about her beliefs and religion and everything else, it's very, like, there's not even a word for it. It pisses me off to a point where, like, you want to bring them and you just want to say, just wake up already, because what they're saying, there's so much cognitive dissonance that what they're saying just, it doesn't make sense to a rational person. But because you are aware of those things, like, it's hard to see it from their perspective and think that you thought that one way before. It's baffling. Yeah, and my mom has her own issues, so she actually is what she claims to be, an anointed one, which for them, they only believe that 144,000 go to heaven. So that's kind of like high rank in its own sense. So my mom, although she partakes and thinks she's going to heaven, people don't really take her seriously, because she has always been a little more on the holistic side. And if you kind of listen to her, she has questioned some of the beliefs in the past, but she's always been told to chalk it up to, you know, human error, and God only reveals so much. So that's what she believes. And it's honestly super complicated, and I could go on forever about that, but that's what it is. And there was a lot more that woke me up, like watching a video about it's by the Prophecy Club, and I wasn't even watching it to learn about anything about their doctrine. I was watching it to understand the Illuminati, but it was talking about the families of the Illuminati, and in those families is the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that right there was another one that I'm like, nope, I want nothing to do with this. One of the probably 3 or 4 things that were definitely something that I could never live with at all, knowing that and continue to be a part of that religion. And that's kind of brings us to where I've been in the past year, because after tearing apart all of my beliefs, I had to figure out, okay, well, let's take a little sidetrack here. Illuminati, one of their assembly halls in Europe is actually completely riddled with the Illuminati eye and other imagery, including their publications, which you have to use a mirror, I believe, for a lot of them, but they do contain images of the Baphomet. And I'll just leave it at that. If you want to know, go do the research, because it's scary. So I had to basically decide what I believed. So I, for the first time actually in my life, read not the entire Bible, but I did start, I think, the first couple chapters of the Old Testament, and I wasn't getting what I was searching out of it, so Hannah's like, just go start in the New Testament. So I started in the New Testament, and it took me at least 4 or 5 months to get through the entire New Testament. I wanted to have it finished before Christmas, and I did. And it was a lot of ups and downs, looking at it from an entirely different perspective and reading it from a new translation, because they have taken out and put in a lot of things, including John, the passages in John that basically outrightly say that Christ is part of God. And a lot of the things that are believed about those who have gifts of spirit. Because I was raised to believe that only certain people had, well, not so much gifts, because we're told that gifts of the Spirit were finished after the 1st century, but that only parts of the gospel, and pretty much 90% of the gospel, is only written for those who have this heavenly calling. So to read the entire gospel in a new light, pertaining that it actually has relevancy to everyone, was very different. It was like reading in things that I had never read before. And in particularly, I had loved, I think it was Galatians, and I wrote a huge write-up on it. Because I had, one of the things that I never agreed with, and that a lot of people don't know, is they don't believe that God is omnipresent, omnipotent, etc. And a lot of people that are witnesses, I'll tell them, oh, you know, we don't believe that God is omnipresent. And they're like, what? And then I have to show them from the publications, oh, you don't actually believe this. And they don't believe that they don't believe it. So one of the things that really kind of sparked my interest, that I needed to know on a deeper level, was what is soul and what is spirit. Because there's a whole bunch of scriptures that talk about soul and spirit, but Jehovah's Witnesses only believe that soul and spirit is the breath of life, the fact that we're breathing. Which, if you read a lot of the scriptures, to put it in that context that it's only the breath of life, it doesn't make sense at all. The scriptures don't make sense if you think about it in that aspect. So I needed to know what soul and spirit was. And that is what basically led me to where I am now. Because I had this deep, profound desire to understand what soul and spirit was. And how long have I been on here? Ooh, okay. I really want to continue, but I could honestly go on forever, because getting into soul and spirit and my understanding of them and how it brought me to where I am now is kind of the more key points into how my life has changed. Because it's become a very different understanding, and it's led to multiple levels of enlightenment. And it's hard to put into words, because the feeling that you get when something just clicks and makes sense, they say it's like remembering something that you've always known but forgotten. Or how I like to put it in what I wrote about my son is, you have this heritage of knowledge that was basically taken from you, and you're realizing it. It's hard to put into words. So having this profound desire to find out what soul and spirit is what eventually led me to literally allowing myself, giving myself the permission to look into Reiki again, to look into crystals. For the longest time, I had boards on Pinterest under secret, because I actually do have a lot of Jehovah's Witness friends who I knew if they saw it would call me out, and they'd be like, oh, that's spiritualistic, we don't believe in that, you know, it's the devil, it's occultic, etc. And, you know, I didn't want to have those labels on me. So I was hiding a lot of myself and a lot of my interests in things like numerology, astrology, various herbalism things, energy therapies, etc. Because I knew that the way that the people who I was surrounded with looked at it was negative. I'm just going to kind of wrap this up with one last thought, because I'm kind of getting a little late here and I'm barely even touched my list of topics. Is what made me choose this path was a question that one of my friends asked. So what made me choose this path was my complete desire to know what soul and spirit was. At the beginning of 2018, when everybody was making their resolutions, I wanted to pick something that would not just be for the year, but would be for my life. What my set intention of trying to be and figure out was. So what I had chosen as my goal, as my intention for 2018, was Matthew 5 and 16, where it says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in the heaven." And I had also found a quote that says, "If you want to give light to others, you first have to glow yourself." So my intention for 2018 was to figure out what light was and how to be light. And those two things are what drove me to find the answers that I needed and wanted to know about soul and spirit, and form my new base of beliefs off of. Because those things are pretty much fundamental to life, to belief, to religion, anything really. So my desire to be light, to give light, to be a more happy person in general is what started the ball rolling. From January up into June, so half of the year, I didn't really do much. I was kind of focused in my art. So some of you have seen it where I'll do like a quote or scripture and I'll do my art, and I felt like that was enough for me. But it wasn't. So I guess after my birthday, I really started to kick things into gear and pursue what I'm doing now, which is energy work and, in a word, working with spirit, and in turn soul, which is kind of a deeper aspect of everything. And I have even yet to find words myself to define what I believe as both of them, soul and spirit. But that's where I am now, is I've been able to identify what that scripture and that quote mean to me, to be light and love, and to now figure out how to put myself out there in order to share my very difficult story and my passion, my desire, which is my calling, which is to be a healer. And everything that I've been through in life, hindsight, 2020 hindsight, they say, I can see how I have very little memory of, my early years, but the things I do remember, I can see how they were setting me up to be where I am now. And to know that makes everything seem worth it. Even though what I went through was literally horrible and scary and anxiety inducing, etc. It was worth it because it led me to where I am now. It gave me a base of knowledge and understanding and life experience that allows me to connect and share with people on this very profound level, because I've went through some really crazy things. But I'm gonna have to cut it short now because Caspian is literally breaking down the door. So next time I'm gonna try and talk a little more about what I'm doing on this path. Yes, baby, just one more second, okay? Just let me wrap this up for my friends. I know, I've been talking a long time. I got stuck on everything. So next time I'll try and talk a little more about what that really means to me, being light and love, and how I've kind of encapsulated my life in that, and how I've gone and changed a lot of the way I act and react and approach things based on my desire to be light and love for myself and for others. I'll also talk more about how I got into reflexology, how I got into Reiki, because that was kind of a turning point for me, and there's an interesting story there, and about how I was raised holistically, because I believe that having that base of being raised by a mother who was very holistically minded really set me up for success. How I was proactive in my life, like I knew what I wanted, I knew how to get where I wanted, not really how to get where I wanted to go, but I knew where I wanted to go. So I knew how to set things in place for myself, which I think is one of my very strong points, because talking with people, I see that they don't have that in their life. So I'll talk about that next time, and crystals and electromagnetic frequencies and all of that, because that in itself is really in depth, and I think a lot of people wanted to kind of know what happened to me with being a Jehovah's Witness and why I left, because I think there was a lot of air of mystery there, because it was something that I wasn't talking about other than the letter that I shared about why I left because of my son. So I really hope that you did find value of this. It was very cathartic for me to talk about it, so I'm glad that I did it. And if you do have questions about anything that I talked about here or anything that I do post, go ahead and either send me a message or comment on here, and I will clear anything up for you. So thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again.